Coast Guard found out a year or so ago that one of the most expensive persons in the Coast Guard was not a senior director, was not a captain or an admiral. It was a technician who happened to, because of where he was placed, he or she, was drawing all the allowances and all the incentives that the Coast Guard had to offer, and therefore the salary of that person was way up here when it should have been down here somewhere, and they didn't know it because they had never really tracked what they now call cost per available hour. And that's what we're doing, is we're working with them now on restructuring the costing structure of personnel for the Coast Guard so they can find out what do our people really cost us, and I'll show you an example at the end if we have time. And not only what do they cost, but if we make a change, if they make a change, they call it an event, whether it's a policy change or an initiative that they have to, that they decide to introduce, or if something happens outside and they have to respond to it, like some kind of a terrorist threat or something like that. What effect is that going to have in terms of the cost of their people and the productivity of their people? And we have a model which we think will solve that for them. I'm not going to take all that detail on all of these, but it's basically the idea. How do you predict the effect of change in the organization? So think about that in your own organization. If tomorrow something happens, do you know, or do you have a system for telling senior management right now what the effect of that's going to be? How do we build a reliable supply chain for excellent talent? We talk about it all the time. How about employee engagement? How do we transform HR to manage HR talent better, manage talent better? How do we connect HR data to customer and financial data, which I'll show you an example of. So those are some of the questions we've been dealing with clients. I think they're fundamental questions for most organizations. It doesn't matter if you're profit or not for profit. They're basic organizational issues of cost management. So here's the system. This is the scan, step number one in the model. What we do is we take a particular job group, whatever that job group might be in your business. If you're in a bank, it could be a branch manager. It could be someone in the IT center. If you're in a hospital, it could be nurses or technicians. You pick the industry, you pick out the one you're talking about. We ask ourselves, what are all the things externally in the marketplace that can affect human capital in our organization? And then later on, we ask about all the internal things. And this list is much longer than this, but constrained by space. Okay? So I just want to play out one example for you. If we look at the labor supply for our industry, we say we may have to do something about our people model because it's Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, God knows what it is next. But we know that our model of people is changing because of technology, because of skills, interests, work-life balance, and all the other wonderful things we talk about all the time. So we know we can't manage people in the future like we have in the past, right? That's what you guys are dealing with right now. So the question is, what might that look like? And then we have to make a decision about it. And now the real question is, how does human and structural capital relate to each other? Because people don't operate in a vacuum, right? They operate in an environment like this. And in your place, maybe they have cubicles, or maybe they have open space. But they have some kind of a facility in which they operate. Maybe they work from home. Maybe they commute, whatever. The point is that human and structural interact. And because we're siloed in organizations, we only think about one, because this is HR. We don't care about that. We don't build buildings. We're not in procurement or facilities or real estate or anything like that. We're over here. The point is these people have to work over here. We need to rethink, perhaps, the structure of our organizations in all these different ways. Okay? And then the third part of organization capital, as you well know, is relational. We may have to find some new sources now because we're going overseas. Maybe we got the diversity thing we were talking about this morning going global. What does that mean in terms of sourcing applicants if we haven't been there before? Or if we're changing our brand from Johnson Wax Professional to diversity. What does that mean in the marketplace in terms of building relationships? So all these things interact, and we don't realize it. I mean, intuitively we might sense it, but we don't manage it that way. That's the problem. You have to manage it. You can't just say, oh yeah, they interrelate, now let's continue. It doesn't work that way. And all these things are all interactive to some degree, or at least potentially interactive, worthy of checking. So is there something here that affects something here and something there, and how does this relate to that, and so on and so forth. Okay. And everybody's sitting there saying, I don't have time for that. I got to get something done. That's what I've been hearing for years. I don't have time to measure. I just got time to do stuff. Okay. Well, if you don't ask the right questions, you don't get the right answer. So this is the base, starting point. Okay, let's move to planning. Okay. We call it workforce planning. It's been around for a very long time. It's ebbed and flowed since World War II based on conditions and changing things and .com and everything else. But basically, it's an industrial era, gap analysis, structure-focused exercise, which to me is obsolescent, at least, if not obsolete. And basically, it looks something like this, doesn't it? We have a bunch of slots in the organization, and some of them are full, and some we're not going to fill. But this is the way we look at it, because we take a business plan, we look at our history of attrition, et cetera, and we say, we got all these holes here, and we got to put somebody in them with certain capabilities, right? But what we forget is, we're not going to fill that one once we've done our planning, because this is something we don't need anymore. We needed it last year, but we don't need it next year, based on what we saw in the scan. But because if you don't do the scan, you never can answer that question because you don't know it exists. That's why all this stuff works together. Okay? So, rather than talk about filling gaps, which is really irrelevant, I mean, who cares how many people you have in the company? Because people are an expense, right? So who cares if we got 10 or 10,000 or 250,000? What's the right number? Should it be 240 or 260 or 300? Who knows? It's the wrong question. You've got to go to capability. The real issue is capability, not number of bodies in the organization. But we do this. We need to do this. Now we give this lip service, but we end up doing this. And the problem is, this job doesn't exist anymore, 6 months from now, or whatever. So we really have to talk about building capabilities. So if we go back to the scan, and we know what the issues are that are evolving for us, and we've got a plan, a business plan, now we can build capability. And forget about this, because this goes away. Every other day, this changes now. We close down, we open up, we expand, we contract. This is irrelevant. In a stable business, like the 60s and 70s, when this was really in its strong point, it was okay, but not today. These are the kinds of questions we should be asking when we start sourcing, right? What is it that we need in terms of this thing called talent in our organization? At which place, in which time, under what conditions do we need, or do we value these different kinds of things? Do we want a creative accountant? Probably not. We want somebody who understands how to add, subtract, and put them in the right column. We don't want them fooling around with it, because they'll be in jail and we might be with them. Okay? So there's different kinds of capabilities required for different types of jobs. So again, as you build your staffing strategy, you have to selectively decide what are the key issues. Artie Nathan, who used to be with Steve Wynn in Vegas for years and years and years, his principal first cut on staffing was whether or not somebody looked him in the eye when they came in for an interview. He says if they looked him in the eye and smiled, they made it through the first cut. If they didn't, he didn't care about them because they're in the people business. They've got to be friendly, they've got to be open, they've got to be smiling. And if that's not their nature, they're in the wrong place. Now, if you've got an accountant sitting in the back corner, who cares if they smile?